All right. Okay. So can you guys see the presentation? All right. Okay. So today we're gonna be talking about plant anatomy and physiology with a focus on the structure, growth, and development of plants. We have a kind of a switch of topics today because we had some scheduling issues. So yeah, this correlates to kind of chapters 35 of the Campbell's biology textbook. So yeah, we'll get started. So plants, they're organisms, and we see them every day. Plants, similar to animals, follow this kind of structural breakdown that their most simple structures are cells. These make up tissues. Tissues make up organs, and organs make up organ systems, and then eventually that becomes an entire organism. So, for example, in like humans, you'd think of the different systems such as the excretory system or the respiratory system, for example. But in plants, we have different organ systems. This includes like the vascular tissues in the vascular plants. So on the diagram's kind of a picture of a plant, and we'll kind of be talking about some of these structures, different organs that make up what are known as plants. Yeah, so we're focusing more on vascular plants in this chapter. Vascular plants are plants that are thought to have evolved later in the evolutionary timeline. This is probably due to the presence of more structures and systems within plants that are categorized as the vascular plants. One main thing that differs them from non-vascular plants are the abilities to transport materials over longer distances. That's made possible due to specialized tissues known as vascular tissue. Um, there's multiple types of vascular tissues as well. Examples include roots, stems, and leaves. So each organ or each organ system as well have cells that are specialized to functioning to provide certain functions, and then there can be split into two different systems: the shoot system, which is above ground; root system, which is below ground. So going on to the first one, we have roots. Roots are organs that are meant to anchor vascular plants into the soil. Roots can also absorb minerals and water from the soil and often will store certain materials such as carbohydrates. Uh, yep. Roots usually have structures known as root hairs. These are kind of structures that will be used to increase the surface area of the root underground, and this allows to reach more materials. There's certain types of roots: the primary root, lateral roots, and tap roots. One thing I kind of forgot to mention. Roots can store materials in specialized plastids. These are non-pigmented. They're called leucoplasts. If you kind of think about chloroplasts in your regular biology classes, it's similar to that, except it's like non-pigmented. You can see a picture of a root on the right side of the page, and the kind of the seed there that's depicting the primary root. Primary roots, they're the types of uh, roots that originate in a seed, and it's the first root that will kind of emerge from the germinating seed. So you can kind of clearly see that on the image. Lateral roots are different types of roots that have they kind of will form off of the primary root and then kind of anchor the plant more into the soil. And there's a special other type of root called the taproot. Taproots, they're kind of large vertical roots, and then they're able to store materials as well. Example of that is the carrot, and the orange portion of the carrot, the one that we eat, has all the nutrients, and that's kind of basically the root of the plant. Okay. Some plants will have what is known as a fibrous root system. This is basically a large amount of smaller roots that can anchor a plant into place. Um, Fibrous root systems are commonly found in like smaller plants that will have easier chance of being uprooted by animals. Like for example, you go out to a grassy area and you just walk around on the grass, chances are you're going to destroy some of the grass. So they need to have a stronger root system to keep the plant rooted in place. So even if you like break off the leaf, then it's the rest of the plant is still there. So an example of a plant with fibrous root systems are grass. They're usually found in monocots, and when the primary root dies out, the roots will form, and the definition for that term, adventitious, is kind of just unusual root locations. They also can exhibit lateral growth. Uh, okay, so moving up from the roots, we encounter stems. Stems are just plant organs that will connect the roots and the leaves. They On the side of the stems, usually you'll have what are known as nodes or buds. Their nodes and buds are kind of the like attachment points for other features of a plant. Nodes are where leaves will eventually attach to the stem, and then you have internodes, which is the stem segment that are found between the nodes. Most of the growth of a shoot is also near the shoot tip or apical bud, and you can kind of see the buds on the diagram there. Uh, we also have axillary buds. These are places where lateral tips can form, and then those tips can eventually also. Oh, shoot! Sorry. Yeah. Sorry about that. Seems like the changing the slide takes a long time to do. So again, what I was talking about is stem structures. Kind of what I've said is on the slide, but in recap, stems will connect leaves and roots and contain different uh, features. So just listing it off again, nodes are where leaves attach to the stem. Internodes are the segments between the nodes. The apical bud is where the shoot tip is, and then axillary buds are where lateral tips are, and then this is these can eventually form different structures as well. Yep. So there's different types of stems that commonly found. One of them is the rhizome. Yeah. Okay. Uh, the rhizome. These are kind of underground shoots. They grow horizontally, which is kind of different from normal stems that you'd think about. But these horizontal growth and also just growing underground makes the plant like harder to remove. New stems can form on the nodes of the rhizome, and then this can allow for vertical shoots that will emerge from out of the soil. So you can see an example of a rhizome on the image, and yeah, notice the horizontal growth and how all of the stem is underground. Another type of stem is the stolon. Stolons are structures that kind of grow horizontally, but they grow on above ground. So you can see it on the image. The thing connecting the leaves, those are stems, and then they kind of are found above ground. The shoots are known as runners, and then axillary buds can form on said runners. This enables the plant to reproduce asexually, as plantlets can grow out from the axillary buds and run along the runners. And on the bottom, you can kind of see a different angle of the diagram. Yeah. So this one, what's different between stolon and rhizome is that where the stem's kind of growing, this one's above ground, the other one was underground. And you can see that it's still responsible for connecting the roots and then the leaves. Okay, so next one. Tubers, these are special types of kind of enlarged rhizomes or stolons. For example, a potato is a tuber. These are specialized usually for storing foods. And if you see a potato or held one, or if you can see it in the image, you'll notice that some potatoes have what are called eyes. These eyes are clusters of axillary buds where other structures again can grow out of. So those are some different types of stems that you may find, and it's probably good to like know that the special types such as the rhizome and then the stolon, in case the exam does ask something about them. So moving upward again, we reach the leaves. These leaves again, it's the main photosynthetic organ, right? Most plants that we see outside are the green plants, and then their leaves are green because they have chloroplast and chlorophyll. Uh, the leaves again, they intercept light for photosynthesis, and they're also the place for gaseous exchange. They're able to also dissipate heat, and sometimes they serve as defense against herbivores or pathogens. The main kind of structures of a leaf include the leaf blade and then also the petiole. The petiole is the section that connects the leaf to the stem, and then the leaf blade is the actual like flat surface. Again, there are different types of leaves, including simple and compound leaves. Simple leaves, they are kind of a single undivided blade. Um, they could be deeply lobed into the stem, but they also have one petiole. Uh, so you can see on the top picture, that's an example of a simple leaf. It's just one flat blade that's connected to the stem with a petiole. Compound leaves differ from that in that uh, a compound leaf can have multiple leaflets uh, on it connected to one petiole. There's no axillary bud at its base, and sometimes each leaflet can be further divided into even more smaller leaflets. One thing to note is that compound leaves do have better protection against infections from pathogens due to the presence of the leaflets. In a simple leaf, if you get infected with a pathogen, then well, it's that leaf would just get infected, and it could possibly infect the rest of the plant. With leaflets, if one of the leaflets get infected, then it's able to, if you can remove it, and less chance of infecting the rest of the plant. Okay. Leaves have there's certain special types of leaves that occur from adaptations to their environment. One example is tendrils. Tendrils are kind of curved leaves that can latch onto and grow around other things for support, or if they need to reach different areas to get more access to, say, light. Uh, Tendrils usually can form coils that bring the plant closer to another object, and these tendrils are just modified leaves. In rare cases, sometimes they're also just stems. So, an example, you can see a picture of a tendril coiling itself around a stick on the top, and then in one of the older Campbell versions, they had a picture of a tendril on the cover. Examples of plants that use the tendril leaf is a grapevine, but if you just think about it, most vines, the plants that you see just curling up on another object, those are types of tendrils. Another leaf adaptation is spines. If you think about cactuses, spines in the cactus. Um, an example of such cacti that have spines is the prickly pear. Their leaves, and they also carry out photosynthesis. No, sorry. The photosynthesis is carried out by the green stem of the cactus, but these leaves, they're usually sharp and thin, and they're the main defense against predators. Another type of leaf are known as storage leaves. Storage leaves are kind of enlarged leaves. You'll notice it's a bit thicker, and they're meant for storing food and nutrients. An example is the onion. If you take a cross section of the onion, you can see all the individual leaves, right? And if you smash it onto the floor, you can get a lot of water and nutrients out of the smashed onion because it keeps on storing stuff in it. Another example of a plant that has these storage leaves are succulents. Like you'll notice, the succulents have thicker leaves, right? And if you cut into it, it's also pretty wet and has nutrients in it. So those are examples of storage leaves. Okay. And then we have another type. These are known as reproductive leaves. These are different in that it has formations of what are called plantlets on like the leaf itself. These plantlets can fall off into the soil and then take root. And eventually, they'll be able to kind of produce like another plant. Reproductive leaves, right? They feature adventitious growth, right? If you think about it, what we said before, adventitious is just growing on a different location. So these plantlets kind of grow on the leaf, right? So an example of adventitious growth. And again, with just anything in evolution, the formation of these leaves, their functions, how they work, it's probably just the product of selection, whichever worked best in its environment. So you'll see some variation within the like adaptations, but usually they'll fall into some of these classes listed. Before that, actually, I want to maybe move to the leaf. So we'll come back to this slide later, but if you have read like Campbell's or have taken some of the biology courses, we do go over leaf structure, right? So you can kind of go over it again here. Leaves, right? They have the different layers, and then there's a specific layer in the middle that allows for photosynthesis. You'll see a big vein going through the leaf. That's kind of part of the vascular system. It allows for material transfer. Um, yep. So we'll go more into detail about that later. So there's different types of plant tissues, right? We're moving up from, or moving down from the macro structures to now just tissues. These three main tissue types include the dermal, vascular, and ground tissues. Each of these kind of types of tissues will form a tissue system that is found throughout the plant and connects all the organs. But specific characteristics of the tissues allows for a differentiation between the different like organs. So if we move, first one is dermal tissue. Dermal tissue, it's like analogous to human skin. It's the outermost layer. It's and kind of like the skin, right? It's our first defense against disease or uh, damage. Same thing with the plant's dermal system. It's the first layer outside, and it's kind of also defensive in some ways. Uh, and specific layers of dermal tissue include, as listed, like cuticle. The cuticle is the outermost covering. It's waxy. In plants, it's waterproof because the plants don't want to have a large accumulation of water on a specific area in it on the surface. So having waterproof leaves or waterproof layering is good for the plant. Epidermis, kind of similar to ours, it's just a layer of cells is that it serves as a protective barrier for the plant. And under that, you have periderm, which is kind of a replacement layer for it. In case the epidermis is old or like damage of periderm can be used to serve as replacements. Uh, then you have guard cells. Guard cells, they're the cells surrounding the stomata on leaves, right? These kind of just control the flow of gases throughout gases and water vapor throughout the plant. Another class or another type of specialized epidermal cells found in shoots are known as trichomes. And sometimes the trichomes are just hair-like structures, but they're used for reducing water loss, reflecting excess light as well. And some of the trichomes can defend against predators or insects through either shapes, just trap like kind of creating a hazardous environment for the insect, or sometimes they have glands that can secrete sticky or toxic uh, compounds against insects. So if we look at the diagram, here you can see the kind of what we just talked about. You can see the trichome is a extension of the dermal tissue, right? It stands out, it's a hair-like projection. You have the cuticle on the very outmost layer, and then you have under it the different layers that we talked about, including the epidermis and the periderm. Uh, right. On the right side, you can see more of the layers than is found on the left side. But these are kind of the structures of the dermal tissue. Notice that it's somewhat similar to uh, like human epidermal. If you look at the structure of human skin, it has some similarities. Again, we move on to the leaf picture again. So, right, here you can see the cuticle on top. Again, that's a waxy layer. Then you have epidermis. Kind of under that's a bit different. Different structures as well. And then on the bottom, you have the stoma, and this one it's labeled. And kind of here we can look more at the guard cells. Guard cells, right? They surround the stomata, which were, if you recall, sites for gas exchange. Usually on plants, stomata allow for like carbon dioxide, water to move in and out of the cell, water vapor. Uh, yeah. So these guard cells can open and close based off of like chemical concentrations. This is what can like block off any gases from entering the cell or exiting it, and then it can also open up to allow for transfer again. Guard cells can open and close based off of like influx of potassium ions, which you can kind of see in the drawing on top, and that leads to water moving into or out of the cells. When the water enters the cell, like you can see the blue portions of this guard cell, that makes them turgid and makes the hole shut. And then when water leaves the cell, and they just relax again, and then you have a hole that can be a site for gas exchange. Yeah, so those are kind of review of the guard cells. It might be worth noting the like how they work. The USABO once asked a question about guard cells, like they give an image or something and said, "Oh, why is it open or why is it closed or something?" Yeah, so it's just uh kind of due to chemical um concentrations, then you have water moving in or water moving out of the cells, which can open or close. Okay, then we have vascular tissues. There's many types of vascular tissues, but the ones that you'll notice like or remember, I guess, is xylem and phloem. These are kind of tubes found in the vascular plants that allow for the movement of materials and water throughout the plant. Xylem moves water and materials from the roots up to the shoots, and then phloem moves sugar from the leaves down to the roots. Kind of pay attention to the diagram. Notice that phloem's on the outside of the plant, xylem's on the inside of the plant. One time USABO did ask a question about this. So yeah, just kind of remember phloem's outside, xylem's inside. And we'll go more into detail on each type of structure. Xylem, again, they're tubes that the tubes that allow for water movement. They're mostly made from tracheids and vessel elements. These are tubular, elongated cells that they're dead, so keep that in mind. They're also lignified, which allows for them to like harden into their tube-like structures and hold it. Tracheids occur in the xylem of all the vascular plants, and you can kind of see a diagram of it. The tracheids are long, thin cells, and they have tapered ends, and this allows for like water that can move through the pits, and you can see it on the diagram again. And they don't, so they don't have to cross the secondary walls. Vessel elements on the left side, they're a bit wider. They're also shorter, thinner walled than the tracheids. These form vessels, which are just like pipes or tubes that run around the plant, and there's perforation on the plants on the plates inside of it. Not sure if you can see it, but the cross section on the diagram shows like small holes in the plates within it. Again, if you want to see these diagrams, Campbell's always has pretty good diagrams on what they're talking about. This was screenshotted from there's a specific page that goes into detail about the two structures. This is just the image from that page. And again, this is more inside of the plant than phloem is. Right, so again, to I guess reiterate, you can kind of see different structures of the plant. Xylem's on the inside, phloem's on the outside, and we're going to talk about the phloem next. All right, so yeah, phloem's a bunch of tubes that are formed from sugar conducting cells. One difference is that instead of being dead like the xylem is, these cells are alive, but they don't have nuclei. They form what are called sieve tube elements, which are just a chain of these cells. Sieve tube elements can also be referred to as sieve tube members. It depends on um, how you refer to them or how the like question is phrasing it. Yeah, these structures also have what are called sieve plates. You can see it in the diagram. It's similar enough to the plate of the vessels from the other slide. These sieve plates, they have pores that can allow for fluid to move from cell to cell, And alongside each sieve tube element is a cell known as the companion cell. These cells are not part of the like tube, but they're connected to the sieve tube elements by plasmodesmata. Again, those are like holes within the cell that allows for transfer of material. And yeah, sometimes these companion cells work to load sugars into the sieve tube elements, and then they can transport that around. Okay, so those are xylem and phloem. Sometimes USAVO will ask about it, but so just keep in mind what they are. Now, another moving again downwards, we're talking about different plant cells. There's three main types listed in Campbell's. First one's parenchymal cells. Parenchymal cells have primary walls that are like relatively thin and flexible, but they lack secondary walls. Usually these types of cells have large central vacuoles as well. They perform most of the metabolizing within the plant, and that includes like synthesis and storage of the organic materials that a plant would need. For example, like photosynthesis occurs within chloroplasts of parenchymal cells in the leaf. That's like kind of the structures that we were looking at earlier. There's sometimes parenchymal cells do exist within stems and roots, and they're kind of colorless. If you think about potatoes, right, the kind of sugar storage within potatoes, starch, those are kind of parenchymal cells. And if you think about fruits, kind of the fruity portion, the part known as the meat of the fruit, that's also parenchymal. Parenchymal cells do retain their ability to differentiate into like different types of cells. So for example, if a cell got injured, like I cut its leaf off, then the parenchymal cells are able to like differentiate and then reform. And so then it's possible that you're able to regenerate an entire plant using just one of its parenchymal cells. Another type of plant cell is the collenchyma. Right, notice that all these types will sound kind of similar at the end. Parenchymal, collenchymal, and then sclerenchymal was the last one, I think. Sclerenchyma. So these collenchyma are kind of grouped in strands, and they work as support for younger parts of the plant shoot. Usually they're elongated, they have thicker primary walls than parenchymal cells, but sometimes these walls are unevenly thick. For example, if you look in the image, you can see some of the cells have very thick walls, but the others don't really. Yeah, young stems or petioles have strands of collenchymal cells like below their epidermis that kind of helps to maintain structure. But its structure is not too stiff, unlike the next thing that we'll talk about, the sclerenchyma cells. Sclerenchyma, these are the main like supporting elements in a plant, but they're very rigid, more rigid than the other two types. Sclerenchyma cells have secondary cell walls, and that's like kind of the thick part. It has a lot of lignin, which is just indigestible polymers that kind of add on to its structural support. These types of cells cannot elongate, they cannot really grow either. So like you'll find these types of cells kind of in the non-growing parts of a plant. Yeah. And then you can further split sclerenchyma cells into the two different types. One is known as a sclerid, the other is a fiber. Sclerids, they're kind of boxier shaped, and they're boxier and more irregular than fibers are. They have very thick secondary walls, and then this kind of makes up structures such as seed coats. And then The other one, the fibers, they're just longer strands. These fibers can be made into different structures, such as ropes. Yeah, and just I guess pay attention to the images of each type of cell. Sometimes I think USABO would ask for, take a look at this, identify. Right. So again, this parenchyma, they have larger vacuoles, right? And so then they're kind of bigger. Then you have the collenchyma. They're not terribly rigid, right? And they'll still look relatively organized. A bunch of just cells there. So they'll be smaller than the parenchyma. And then you have the sclerenchyma, right? Again, if you get a sclerid, then you'll see it's pretty irregularly shaped, or it's just boxy. And then fibers they'll probably indicate somehow that it's a longer strand. Okay, moving on to growth. Plants can exhibit either indeterminate or determinate growth. Indeterminate growth is just when the plant is able to continue growing as long as it's alive. They have undifferentiated tissue known as meristems. This is what allows for continued growth of the plant. However, some of its features may not share indeterminate growth and will just die out. The determinate growth is when plants just stop growing after a certain point. Examples of structures that do undergo determinate growth include flowers and leaves. So the diagram kind of is there to show differences between indeterminate and determinate growth. Right, indeterminate, you can see the plant is continually growing upwards, whereas determinate, it just stops there. Okay, moving on to meristems. Meristems, remember, it's a bunch of tissues that allow for growth. There's a few types. One of which is the apical meristem. These are found kind of at the root and shoot tips, and they have cells that will go through primary growth. Primary growth is just growth in length, and allows for more like reach from the roots or the shoots. And this allows for more sunlight or more, area underground to get materials from the soil. Lateral meristems, they're kind of used for growing in thickness instead of length, and these can be found in the vascular or core cambium. And yeah, if you refer to the older diagram that we had about xylem phloem, right, the lateral meristem is kind of like growing outwards. It allows for the formation of xylem and phloem. Yep. So primary meristems, there's kind of a diagram you can see on the right. That's a diagram from Campbell's, right? It's pretty. Has all the colors that allow you to differentiate which is which. And then you have the kind of a microscope slide on the left, and that allows you to kind of see what they look like in real life. So meristems, there's multiple parts of the primary meristem. This kind of correlates to what tissue they're going to form. So protoderm is a structure that will form dermal tissue. Just remember derm within both of them. Ground meristems create ground tissue. Procambium creates vascular tissues. So you can kind of see that on the Campo image. The innermost layer, right, the purple one, that's the procambium. This makes up the vascular tissues, and then if you move outward, you have the ground meristem, so ground tissues form from there, and then after that, protoderm on the outside. If you look in the image, you'll see the root cap on the bottom, and then the root apical meristem, which allows for like growth. It contains a bunch of undifferentiated cells that are able to just differentiate into something else later. Yep. So, okay. Then we move on to kind of secondary growth. Secondary growth is controlled by lateral meristems. It's similar in both the stem and roots. Lateral meristems include vascular cambium, and in the woodier plants like trees, you have core cambium. So kind of this is a picture of the secondary growth and primary growth. Vascular cambium is located between the xylem and phloem within the vascular bundle. The cells of these vascular cambium can divide and form secondary xylem phloem, which we talked about. They contain lignin. Again, we've kind of covered what that was. In woody plants, core cambium is the outermost lateral meristem. It produces cork cells, which have waxy substances that can repel water. The phloem, together with the cork cells, can form bark, which protects the plant against physical damage and helps reduce water loss from them. And yeah, the cork cambium cork cells, they form what is known as the periderm. And then the periderm is kind of substitutes for the epidermis in mature plants. And these are what kind of allows for secondary growth or the widening of the plant. Yeah. Okay, so